week 10 of the fantasy football season. And here's a few tight ends I've looked at on the waiver wire this week. The first guy, Dan Arnold of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So right here, it's a little thin this week in tight end waiver wire rates. But Arnold, another good game for PPR owners for the Jaguars. 4 catches, 60 yards in week 9 in a shocking victory over the Buffalo Bills in a 9-6 defensive battle. So right here, Arnold, the last few games, he's been pretty decent in fantasy leagues with double-digit fantasy points now in week 8 and week 9 in PPR leagues. And in week 10, he's got a good matchup at the Indianapolis Colts that give up the 8th most fantasy points to tight ends. So last week, he got added in 23% of fantasy leagues was Dan Arnold, but he's still available after all that, still in 73% of fantasy leagues. And him and Trevor Lawrence have a good rapport, and that's what Jacksonville wanted early in the season, a veteran tight end. And they made the trade with the Panthers to get Arnold, and so far he's been panning out pretty good here for Jacksonville, and he's definitely a tight end that should get added more in leagues this week. The next tight end is Ryan Griffin of the New York Jets. So the Jets here, their offense is totally different with either a Mike White or Josh Johnson in it. It's actually guys that step up in the pocket and are more traditional quarterbacks than a Zach Wilson who scrambles PA boots a lot out of the offense and looks to throw on the run. So right here, Griffin filling in for Croft, who got banged up in that week 9 ball game at Indianapolis. 4 catches, 28 yards, and a touchdown. He had 7 targets. And this Jet team, they're going to be trailing once again versus the Buffalo Bills, where they have to throw the football a lot in that one. So right here, he's available in 99% of fantasy leagues is Ryan Griffin. And we've seen flashes from him in the past with the Houston Texans. So now if he just gets a chance here with the Jets, I think he could be a decent option at the tight end position. The next tight end is Tyler Conklin of the Minnesota Vikings. So I've recommended Conklin a lot throughout the season, and each week his percentage bumps up just a little bit. Right now, he's available only in 62% of fantasy leagues, going up 13% from last week his ownage. So right here, another decent game in Baltimore in week 9. 5 catches, 45 yards for Conklin in that one. So right here, he's perfect in PPR leagues, in my opinion. He's going to get the 4 or 5 catches with 50 or 60 yards. In the last couple weeks here, he's had good games. Week 6 at Carolina, 3 catches, 71 yards. Week 8 versus the Cowboys, 5 for 57. And like I mentioned, week 9 at Baltimore, 5 for 45. So week 10, another good matchup for him and the Vikings versus at the Los Angeles Chargers that give up the 3rd most fantasy points to tight ends. So Conklin, pretty much each and every week, I think you could start penciling him in anywhere from 7 to 9 fantasy points, because a lot of defenses obviously roll the coverage to Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen and Dalvin Cook out of the backfield. So right here, Conklin, he should be added in more leagues, and I believe he will this week. Right now, available still, though, like I mentioned, in 62% of fantasy leagues. The next tight end is Evan Engram of the New York Giants. So Evan Engram, he's been surprising to me over the last couple weeks now, and he's starting to kick it into gear with 3 double-digit fantasy games in a row in PPR leagues. Week 7 versus Carolina, 6 for 44. Week 8 at the Kansas City Chiefs, 3 catches, 15 yards and a touch. Versus the Vegas Raiders, 3 catches, 38 yards and a touchdown. I know week 10 he goes on bye here, but if you want to stash him, or even as a guy later next week, if you got an injury spot or an open spot on your roster, Evan Ingram's a decent pickup at the tight end position. And in week 11, he's got a decent matchup at the Tampa Bay Bucks, who give up the 9th most fantasy points to tight ends. So right now, Ingram's available in 60% of fantasy leagues, but he'll probably be dropped because a lot of teams, they're not going to hold on to him, especially with bye weeks at tight end and other positions. So they'll probably drop Engram. He'll be available in more leagues, but he's definitely a tight end that needs attention on the wire. And the 5th and final tight end I would look to get on the wire this week, Adam Troutman of the New Orleans Saints. So Troutman had his best game of the season in week 9 versus the Falcons. 4 catches, 47 yards on 7 targets. So maybe him and Trevor Siemian are going to have a good rapport after a lot of practice rep these guys have taken together. In week 10 at Tennessee, it's not the greatest of matchups. Tennessee gives up the 6th least amount of fantasy points to tight ends, but I think Troutman's a good target. And coming into the season, he was a sleeper for a lot of people and on many fantasy football websites. So right now, Troutman's available in 95% of fantasy leagues. In my opinion, he's more of a deeper league ad, but right here, he definitely has to get some attention with Trevor Siemian targeting him a decent amount of time. And in the last 2 ball games, he does have 13 targets. So that's a few tight ends I look to hit on the waiver wire for week 10 of the fantasy football season.